Richard Medhurst, another of our prolific and extremely popular correspondents, specializes in the Middle East, but is by no means consigned to that. But I fear he is going to be consigned to that this evening and perhaps for many weeks and months to come. Richard Medhurst, they keep pulling us back in, don't they? It looks like your country and your region of the Levant is going to be on fire this evening if the Israeli media is to be believed, and if the decisions of sundry airlines, embassies, including crucially MEA, which flew during the Civil War, never stopped flying. The MEA, Middle East Airlines, Lebanon's own national carrier, is marooned in London and many other capitals this evening. How serious is this threat? What happens next?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on. Well, we've been saying several times in the last months that there could be war with Lebanon and Israel. And honestly, I think the Israelis, if they want a war, they should just hurry up and start it instead of trying to find an excuse with the Syrian Druze children that they killed. Because the minute that they start something with Lebanon, the gates of hell are going to be open on them. And again, I don't say that as a matter of opinion or because I would like that to happen. I'm just stating this as an objective fact. For the last months, and keep in mind, we're not at the real war yet, right? But nevertheless, for the last months, we've seen Hezbollah systematically dismantle all of the radar towers, the surveillance, the electronic warfare capabilities that the Israelis have, costing them billions of dollars. We've seen Hezbollah flying the new Hudhud drone over the petrochemical sites, the Haifa port, both military and economic assets. We've seen them also fly over the top, so this is at the highest altitude of 2,000 meters, the top Israeli spy base in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. We've seen them also fly recently over the Ramat David Air Base. So we've also seen the early warning systems and reconnaissance taken out, these giant balloons, the Skystar 313, the Skydew. So there's nothing that they've left out. They've blinded the Israelis effectively. They've taken out their eyes and ears in the north. And then on top of that, they've destroyed their Iron Dome. And as a result, we've seen all these settlements set on fire. So, I don't think that the Israelis, again, I don't know if it's sensible to make a prediction, but I don't think that the Israelis would be particularly smart to start a war with Lebanon. And if they did, they are going to be destroyed within 24 hours. And that's a quote from an Israeli military official. So, if we've seen all of these things happening before the actual quote unquote war, we can only imagine what's going to take place once an actual war begins. All of these economic sites in Israel will be destroyed. And it's going to be for once the Israelis that take a real proper thrashing rather than them just, casually bombing Beirut and getting away with it.
They used the phrase in the Likud press release and media this evening that Israel would attack all of Lebanon this evening. In other words, escalating, expanding the war from south of the Litani, from the Hezbollah heartlands, into the capital city itself. Now, you and I have both been in a Beirut reduced to rubble, the last time in 2006. That's deliberate, isn't it? It's to tell the international community, it's to tell the people in Lebanon who don't like Hezbollah that we're about to destroy your towns and cities, and it will be Hezbollah's fault. Again, is that bluff? And if it isn't bluff, what do you think the international impact of that will be? Lebanon on fire and Beirut destroyed.
Yeah, I remember in 2006, I wasn't in Beirut, but I was next door in Damascus. So, I mean, just, an hour, 2 hours away. And, there was a real risk of the war spreading, and everyone's glued to the TV, and you could see them bombing the dams, the civilian infrastructure, and they even developed this Dahia doctrine, basically that you're supposed to use disproportionate force to level civilian apartment buildings and infrastructure, which is a war crime. There's, let's be unequivocal. And nevertheless, of course, it's an Israeli military doctrine. But yeah, what you're saying, George, when you're quoting these Israeli statements, that is the intended effect, is to scare the Lebanese into turning against Hezbollah. And basically, it's a typical divide and conquer strategy. Like, rather than the Israelis trying to do psychological warfare directly, they'll plant a seed in people's minds and then try and have them go and act it out and spread that kind of propaganda against Hezbollah and say that, well, you're going to cause an all-out war, which is what we always hear, to be honest. You always have this criticism, but I think it's not a fair one. It's not one anchored in reality. If you look at the last 9 months, Hezbollah have been striking Israel almost on a daily basis. They started on October 8th. They've struck Israel over 1,600 times. Not once have they faltered with the rules of engagement and caused the Israelis to turn it into an all-out war. So they've been very, when it comes to Nasrallah as a strategist, he's been very good at keeping it contained. We have to admit that, even though the Israelis surely recognize this, and it probably makes them angry and annoyed, because they know that if they respond if they go and bomb deeper inside of Lebanon, which has happened on a few occasions, Hezbollah just do the same thing. They'll go and bomb deeper inside of occupied Palestine. So I'll just quote something to you that I read in The Guardian a few hours ago, and they were interviewing people in Lebanon, and one person said they don't vibe with Hezbollah's lifestyle, but they do trust them to protect Lebanon because they're not foreigners. They're just defending their homes. And I think that really encapsulates how most Lebanese feel. Not all of them, but the majority.
The foreign minister of Lebanon made the unassailable point that if the belly is to be the explosion on the sports field in Majd al-Shams, then it has no basis in international law. None of the casualties were Israelis. All of them were Syrian nationals of the Druze faith. And the Golan Heights does not belong to Israel. It is illegally occupied territory. So you cannot claim to be acting in self-defense when an incident, whoever was responsible for it, and I made my own views clear in my monologue, when the incident didn't happen in your country or to your compatriots.
Absolutely, George. Yeah, you're 100% correct. I mean, the only country in the world that actually thinks the Golan Heights are Israeli is the United States, and that's because of Donald Trump. So he broke with decades of United States foreign policy. And if you look at United Nations Security Council Resolution 242, which was passed after the '67 war, where they tell the Israelis to leave all the occupied territories, that includes the Golan Heights. And there are subsequent resolutions also in 1980, 1981, telling the Israelis that their annexation is, quote, null and void. So under international law, the Golan Heights are Syrian. And, of course, Donald Trump can think whatever he likes, and they named a settlement after him called Trump Heights, which sounds ridiculous, but it doesn't change the fact that the people in Medhurst are Syrian, and they're Druze. And if you look at the list of casualties, you'll see from the names, these are all Syrian names. You have Druze names and Christian names, but they're all Syrian. And the thing is, the Israelis are purposely diluting and obfuscating and trying to make it seem like they are Druze citizens of Israel, which is ridiculous, because most people who live in most of the Druze community in the Golan Heights rejected Israeli citizenship. I know that the argument Israelis will make is that, well, they're allowed to serve in the Israeli military, but not from this community. Those are in other parts of, so-called Israel. The Syrians in the Golan Heights, the Druze, reject Israel. The majority of them want nothing to do with Israel. They are occupied people. They identify as occupied people, and they identify as Syrians. And they proudly come out and protest with the Syrian flag, and they've done this a million times. So there's no mix-up to be had here. And to be honest, this idea that Israel suddenly cares about children when they've been murdering children every single day, the same day, just yesterday morning, they killed 50 people in Deir al-Balah in Gaza, among them children. I mean, the irony is one of them was a footballer, and they've killed 66 children since October 7th, who are football players in youth academies. So just to draw that kind of that contrast between Israel pretending that, you know, their citizens were killed on a football pitch, complete nonsense. As a matter of fact, I have my doubts that it's Hezbollah, that we can blame Hezbollah or say Hezbollah are responsible, because as I was saying before, they've struck Israel 1,600 times. They've never, you know, accidentally hit any Druze communities or civilians. On the contrary, it's the Israelis, their Iron Dome, which has misfired on Medhurst, on this exact same town. Just in April, a few months ago, this happened, and it was recorded on video. So these are Syrian citizens. The Israelis have no sovereignty over this piece of land, and any attack that they would predicate on, and base on what happened to these Syrian Druze is, it's completely absent of any logic.
I know the Druze people very well, but for those watching who don't, kindly describe what do we mean, who do we mean by the Druze?
Well, Druze are, I mean, in Syria you have dozens of ethnic groups and religious groups, and Druze are one of them. So they're people who, you know, no matter where you find them, if you find them in Lebanon, they'll identify as Lebanese, and in Syria as Syrians. And they're very loyal to their country, and they have no problem integrating, and they are just simply a religious sect of Shia Islam. So, you know, just like you would have Syrian Christians, you have Syrian Druze. So it's just identifying their particular religious sect, and they're very private about their religion. They keep it to themselves. It's not something that they flaunt in other people's faces and make a big deal about. They're very, very respectable people, very kind people, and you will find them all across the Middle East, but especially most of all in Syria, Lebanon, and of course in occupied Palestine. And I wore this because it looks similar to their colors, but they identify 100% as Syrian inside of Syria, and in Lebanon as Lebanese. And I know that, as I was saying before, that the Israelis allow them in their army. But again, you know, we have to remember that 100,000 of them were ethnically cleansed from the Golan Heights and, dispersed in other areas. And you have some Druze in the Israeli military, but they are not Druze that come from the Golan Heights or who identify as Syrian. So that's what I could say.
The Olympic Games is underway. Israel, according to the Israeli government, is bringing sunshine to the Seine. There's a huge Israeli presence there, but a very, very small Palestinian presence, because hundreds of athletes have been murdered over the last 10 months. What do you think the feeling is in the area towards not just the participation of Israel in the Olympic Games, but the scenes that we saw in the opening ceremony last night? I have been to the cave in Syria where the Last Supper is thought to have been taken. And the idea that it should be blasphemously lampooned in the way that it was in Paris last night is deeply offensive to me. How's it going down there?
Well, you know, about the Olympic Games, George, I think I'm Christian myself. I understand why people are offended by the mockery of this, Last Supper scene, and I know they've apologized for it and so on, but I think, which as you rightly began by saying with the Israeli presence, I think that should be the main focus, because for me, what's much more offensive is allowing the Israelis to be there in the first place. And I don't know if they're trying to divert attention or something away from that by causing such a huge row with this giant opening ceremony. But the fact that they've allowed the Israelis to come there is really scandalous, and they've violated their own Olympic charter by doing that. The reasons are the number of regulations and rules that they violated are endless. They really are. If you look at the Olympic charter, it says there's a mission, there's a peace mission, and they use that as a basis to ban Russian and Russian athletes and athletes from Belarus. And they said that if they have any connection to the security services or the army or any pro-war statements. They can't participate in the Olympics as neutral players. So first of all, they can't come with their own flags, and in addition to that, they have to jump through hoops, no pun intended, to participate. And with the Israelis, every single athlete is a soldier. Every single one of them. There's only very rare exceptions, they've all been at this Wingate Institute, which is basically a facility that hosts all the national teams and is an IDF base. So you can see the mixing of military and athletics there, and also on their social media, all of them have posted things like dedicating their medals to the Israeli forces, saying thank you to the heroic Israeli soldiers, saying that they should erase Gaza. I mean, I haven't finished with my investigation, but the number of things that they've said, the amount of things they've said to support the war effort, it's truly staggering. It's outrageous. Almost every single section of the Israeli Olympic team, any sport you can think of, taekwondo, fencing, there's one athlete at the very least, who said something like this. And the Russian players, they're not in the army. I don't know of any of them that are in the army, and none of them did anything close or remotely close to what the Israeli athletes are saying. Including signing bombs, for example. That's something else that the Israeli flag bearer was doing. So the double standard is staggering, and not only that, let's put aside the individual athletes for a second, but they've been slaughtering the Palestinian team. They killed the Olympic coach, the coach for the Olympic football team. Is dead. They murdered him a few months ago with his family. You look at the national team, they've killed 3 of the footballers from the Palestinian national team in Gaza, also with their families. You look at also the referees. They've killed a FIFA referee in Gaza. They've killed an assistant referee. I mean, they haven't left anyone out. That says a lot about how indiscriminate the bombing has been. And not only that, but you saw how they degraded the sports facilities. I mean, there's not one football pitch in Gaza that has not been damaged or destroyed by the Israelis. And the Yarmouk Stadium, they went and changed it into a concentration camp. You saw them stripping men and even boys. You had boys as young as 10 in their underwear with blindfolds. And they were bulldozing the grass in the back so they can't play football on the pitch anymore. It's just sadistic. We could really sit here all night and list all the reasons. But, let's be unequivocal. The Israelis have violated FIFA regulations, the human rights policy, the Olympic Charter, and they shouldn't be anywhere near the Olympics, and the Football Association should be banned as well. So, it's really disgusting what they did with the opening ceremony, but I'm more offended by the Israelis being there, to be honest.
Richard Medhurst, as always, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.